Welcome to Anxious Like You, a podcast hosted by Micheline Malouf and Nadia Adesi, two therapists who are anxious like you. In each episode, Micheline and Nadia dive into their guests' experience with anxiety and give you the tools you need to face your anxiety head on. This podcast is made in collaboration with Dive Through, a mental wellness company.
Welcome to Anxious Like You. Today we'll be speaking with Mackenzie Dipman, who was on the latest season 2 of Love Island. She will be discussing more of her story growing up, her experience with bullying, anxiety, and relationship challenges, as well as some tips that have helped her manage her mental health. Let's dive in. Today we have Mackenzie Dipman, and we're just going to cut through the bullshit and go right in. So,
Love it.
Therapist, watching your show on season 2 of Love Island, we were able to pick up on what looked like anxiety on the show. Was that what was happening?
Yes. It's definitely an environment that if you do have tendencies towards being a little more anxious, that can definitely bring it out in you. Put in very unfamiliar circumstances, social situations constantly. With people that you don't know and with cameras around, yeah, you're definitely bound to get anxious. They did have good support for us, and that was a part of the testing going into the show is they find out your anxieties and try to make sure that you are mentally prepared to be in that kind of environment.
Oh, that's interesting. So was it like a test or something, or how?
Yes. So you go through psychological testing in order to be on the show. But what's something that's interesting is, like, for me, a way that I actually manage my anxiety is, and I've been doing this since high school, is just like putting on a show on Netflix, like somehow The Talking. I actually saw this meme one time on Instagram that said that anxious people like to rewatch TV shows that they've seen before because you know how it's going to end. And I probably watched The Office all the way through like 20 times. I have a cycle of sitcoms: The Office, Parks and Rec, New Girl, and Friends, and I just cycle through them. And I just, hopefully it seems new each time. So without TV, that's one of the best ways that I manage my anxiety. So I had to learn how to manage it differently when I was inside the villa.
That's amazing. And I actually love that because those are the shows that I watch the
You
same
do?
as, yeah. So through quarantine, my husband and I have been like rewatching. We just rewatched The Office. We rewatched Seinfeld, but yeah, Seinfeld, Parks and Rec, The Office. Those are like Did I say Friends already? Yeah. See, I can't even remember, but those shows are like on cycle.
On
Yes.
cycle. And yeah, you find comfort knowing that you know what's going to happen. So it can just be on in the background and there's no surprise.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously just by listening to that, we can get a sense of you being somebody who likes to be in control or to have control with what's going on in your life. And now you're going on reality TV in a house with people you don't know, with doing things that you've probably never done. So I'm assuming anxiety is at an all-time high.
Yeah, it was definitely high. Like I said, the crew involved did everything that they can to help us, and we definitely had resources at our disposal. But I think for me, I've always, in social situations, I've struggled with my anxiety the most, which surprises people because I am able to be like pretty outgoing. But I think that something about anxiety is like it doesn't always make sense, and it's not always predictable. I've noticed that it depends on the size of the group. Like if it's a very small, like 1 to 2 people with me, then I'm totally good. If it is a slightly larger group, then I struggle. And then if it's a really large group, I'm okay because I can kind of like disappear into a crowd and then make those smaller groups. So the villa was actually, the number of people was around that tough spot for me of where my social anxiety is typically at its highest, because that number of, 10 to 14 people, that's kind of where I sort of sometimes struggle.
Yeah. How does anxiety show up for you? What do you feel?
I definitely get like sweaty. I definitely get sweaty. Sometimes I get kind of like short of breath. I feel like I've always been anxious since I was a little kid, honestly. I remember on the playground, I was bullied a lot. When I was younger, I was a little bit chubbier, and I was just a very like sweet, naive soul. And so I did get picked on a lot, and I think I didn't know I was getting picked on. And then it kind of over time, as I started to become more aware, it grew into just being like always just kind of generally anxious going into any situation at school. And I would just sort of, I'd be sweating. I would just be like kind of reserved. And then I would get really red in the face. Oh gosh, I used to get so red in the face when I was younger. I couldn't hide anything. Like anytime I was anxious or nervous, I would get red. And then as I got older, it started to be a lot more around school. I ended up doing online school because the classroom environment caused me to be so anxious. Like I would just be sweating and just like my mind would be racing in class, and I couldn't get any work done. And so I had to, make the hard decision to be like, I have to take myself out of that environment. I was a straight A student, but I was not doing well because I was skipping class because I just didn't want to go to the classroom. And then also essays give me like this paralyzing anxiety. I just graduated in August, but my final paper, I literally couldn't see. Like my anxiety, it's never happened to me before, but I got so anxious that I was losing my vision. And I've never had that happen.
Wow.
And yeah, it kind of was like in spurts for like 24 hours. I was like trying to write, and then like my vision would just kind of like blur. So yeah, in the villa, it's definitely for me, I need to take time to myself to recharge and deal with my anxiety. And that is hard when you're in a group. And that taught me a lot about being open about my anxiety. And, I voiced to some of my closer friends in the villa, I'm an anxious person. I'm very introverted. So don't take it personally when I remove myself from situations, because I'm just need some time, to myself. That's really hard to do with cameras around, and tons of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking, what we saw on the show was, you would, you would show emotions. Like, I think you were one of the ones that I personally, as I watched, thought, I love that she shows her emotions and she doesn't, hold it back, because I think a lot of people have, difficulty doing that. And especially in front of cameras and all of these people, knowing that so many people are watching this, but you were still able to, were you just being genuine, or was it hard for you to hold it back?
So it's a very emotionally charged environment. There actually was people being a lot more emotional than I would say the public saw. I would say in general is a pretty cry positive household, I call it. Because a lot of us did cry. I think a lot of us are more in touch with our emotions than some people had been in a long time. I definitely wear my heart on my sleeve. My ex-boyfriend said that I show my emotions. And that was something that was like interesting for him to get used to, because he doesn't show any, versus I'm very much an open book. And that was real and raw emotion. And people are critical of that. And I think that that's unfortunate, because I think that emotion is what makes us so uniquely human. Like we're able to have emotions and have feelings. And obviously, I think I knew and Connor knew very early on that our relationship was very real. So those feelings are very, very intense, even though it doesn't seem like a long period of time. So yeah, I was emotional, like this was someone I saw myself being with. And so it's emotional. Yeah. I mean, I'm not ashamed of it. Sure. I wish that maybe I hadn't cried so much, but not really. I mean, I have emotions.
Yeah, that's the thing. When exactly like you said people were critical of it, and it makes sense that general public who might be insecure with their own emotions are critical of someone else who is so comfortable in theirs. But as therapists, me and Micheline are like, yes, we love this girl. She is not scared to show her emotions with 10 to 14 people around on camera. That's not easy. And I think it's
Mhm.
something to be proud of for sure.
Thank
It's something
you.
to help end a stigma with that,
Yeah.
because it's, especially men. I don't know. I feel like women are more comfortable with that, because I feel like we all kind of allow our emotions to flow much easier. But men in general, there's that stigma of, oh, that person's crying or that person's crying, and they call women difficult. I don't know if you've had that experience, but
Oh
they'll
yeah.
say, yeah. And it's so annoying. And I could see that like sparked a reaction in you. But yeah, it pisses me off, because we should be able to cry and show our emotions. And that's one of the reasons I actually loved you on the show, because I was like,
Oh,
maybe
thank you.
maybe other people weren't shown to cry as often as you did. Maybe that was,
Mhm.
just the way the cameras were following you around. But I was like, yes, good. Somebody, we need to normalize this.
Yeah, and that was what I was really excited about, like coming off the show. Like I didn't know how things were going to be portrayed, and some people have reached out. A lot of people reached out to me and been like, are you upset? Like, do you feel like they gave you a bad edit, like quote unquote? The thing is, like, I want to believe that me being vulnerable and giving myself to the experience might have inspired other young women to do the same in their relationships. And if that means that I'm going to be called emotional, that's fine by me, because I think that too often people aren't, and they regret it later. And, I think it is hard too. You mentioned that about women, it's being more normalized. Like, Connor is a very emotional person. And I think, unfortunately, people saw that as a weakness in him versus I saw that as a strength. I was able to connect with him, and in a way that we're having a lasting relationship because he was in touch with his emotions. And I think his emotions confuse him. And I think that that's unfortunately something that a lot of young men go through, is they're confused about how they're feeling. They're feeling upset. They're feeling these things that guys are taught not to feel. And I think that that can cause anxiety for people, when they're expected to like be this big, strong man. And they're like, I've got feelings too. And I think Connor showed those. I think he felt more comfortable showing those like as the show went on. And I saw a lot of growth in him as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned being bullied in school, and that
Mhm.
caused you to go into homeschooling. How do you think the bullying impacted your anxiety, or do you feel like that was the reason behind the development of anxiety, or was it something you just always lived with?
So when I was younger, I was bullied because I was just kind of that like kind of chubby girl that just, I wasn't like too chubby, but I was a little chubby, and I was just like always smiling. I didn't necessarily, I was kind of dorky. And so I was the butt of a lot of jokes. And then as I got older and I started to grow into myself more, and I started to become more of a developed young woman, I started to get bullied for different reasons. And I think the big turning point in my bullying occurred when my house was vandalized.
Oh,
When I was in high school, these girls who I knew actually broke into my yard, printed out all these photos of me, wrote things on them, and like vandalized, trashed my entire yard.
oh
I was
my
out of
God.
town, but my parents had to find that. And thank goodness I wasn't there, because I think it would have been extremely traumatic. But I think that that was a big turning point for me in my anxiety. And yeah, I mean, it's hard. It is difficult when I've been through a lot. I feel very fortunate with my life, but I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. I really struggled to make friends. I moved a lot. And yeah, I was bullied a lot. I wasn't the girl that people wanted to be friends with. And I tried so hard to be friends with people, and I was so sweet to everybody, and I would like bake things for people. I was like, it almost could be called like desperate. And it just like never really, never really clicked. And so I think that that kind of was worsen my anxiety, but it's also made me a lot more dependent on myself. And I think now as an adult, I'm appreciative of it, because I can cope on things and cope with my anxiety, like with myself. And I don't need to rely on other people to make that possible. So I don't know if that was kind of a roundabout answer to your question,
No.
but
No.
yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So I know that you said that you struggled with making friends and you didn't understand why. Was that kind of an insecurity you brought going into the show? Did you have any people pleasing tendencies to go and above and beyond to try to create friendships?
Well, that's the thing about me that's kind of bizarre is like it's this two-way thing where like I'm not really bothered by like what people think, but at the same time I do want to have that companionship and I want to have friendships. But I did really struggle with that a lot. I struggled with connecting with the girls sometimes because I'm not very typical. Like I spend a lot of time alone and I would even talk to the girls and be like, is this normal for you guys? Like hanging out with girls like this all the time, being around people all the time. Like I never, my relationships, my dating life was always separate from my friends. So to combine that was really overwhelming. And yeah, that was really hard for me. I think I always kind of felt like I was on the outside, even in the villa, and Connor helped a lot to make me feel included. And I think that's why when things struck, we had a hard time, why I felt so alone was because he really understood my feeling of being on the outside and tried to help.
Yeah.
Just taking that back for a second, how come your friend life and your relationships were so separate prior to Love Island?
I think you can kind of see on Love Island why I might have done that. The moment that kind of people's opinions got involved is when I sort of lost sight of my own opinions. And I think that that's kind of been a big part of it is that. And then I typically date outside of my friend group. I used to like to keep that separate. And I thought that kind of worked because I could compartmentalize things a bit more. Because it is really stressful when all of a sudden, you know, if you're in a fight with your boyfriend, your friends know about it before you've even told them. And then they've got their opinions. You know what I mean? Yeah, so that's definitely been a huge change. I don't think I've ever dated within my friend group before. So this is new.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you mentioned that, when people get involved, like as soon as people got involved, that's when you kind of lost sight of what you wanted on Love Island and what really maybe your truth was. Do you think that had anything to do with why you and Connor broke up in the first place?
Oh, absolutely. So the morning that we did on that girls retreat, the girls communicated to me that Connor had said to them that he no longer wanted to be exclusive with me.
Oh.
And that was my mindset going into Casa Amor. And I was confused because I felt like, Connor and I had been the longest couple in the villa. We got together before Johnny and Sally. And so I kind of felt like, we were looked at as a couple to be like respected, not like just as being a solid couple. But I just never felt like people really took our relationship very seriously. And then to hear the girls say that to me, that's confusing. And I think that's where the sense of belonging comes in, where I started to feel like kind of on the outside when Connor and I's problems were being broadcast to the group and they were involving themselves. I felt like it was isolating me because I wasn't getting to tell my story, and people were not even telling Connor's accurately. They were misunderstanding him. And so I think when the boys were out of the house, who had the loudest opinions about my relationship, I just finally felt like I could breathe. And I felt accepted by the girls. And I think that I was so excited about being accepted by them and feeling like I was a part of the group again, that I associated that with the feeling of Connor and I being apart.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're making decisions based on wanting to belong again, that feeling, because it kind of goes back, and as therapists, we're like linking, back to childhood. It's that, we grow up with these patterns that we create in our lives. And as a child, you were bullied and not accepted. And you said you baked things for people and wanted them to accept you. So there was a point in the house where you felt like maybe you were losing that acceptance, and then finally you got it again. And that to you meant, oh, I must be on the right track. Maybe breaking up, not being with Connor is the right thing to do.
Yeah, I kind of felt like everyone had just been like shouting at us, like, you guys aren't right together. And it felt like America was doing the same. And I think that was my thing. Was I have been love blind before. I have gotten caught up in the feeling of being with someone, and I've been naive to things that were going wrong. And so when this many people in my circle, my closest friends in there, America, is saying, you know, you guys aren't right for each other, and then all of a sudden he's gone, I'm hearing he doesn't want to be exclusive with me, and then the girls are accepting me again, and I'm having fun with them again. The first time I'd had fun in like what felt like forever because of all the drama. I was like, wow, like I'm just so happy, like I'm being accepted. And it really had nothing to do with Jalen. It had everything to do with me loving how I was feeling being with those girls. The bond that we created during Casa was so intense. And I felt like if Connor and I were meant to be, then when he came back from Casa Amor, if he came back alone, which I was not positive he'd come back alone, I thought he might come back with somebody, that we would work it out. You know, I never made any promises to Jalen about my intentions with him. I kind of saw it as I was taking a chance, and I was taking a chance on, you know, maybe admitting that maybe I wasn't right about my relationship. And unfortunately it didn't play out the way that I would have hoped. But yeah, I think that's what's sad, is like people don't know that that's kind of what I was going through. But it's hard to talk about it because I'm still with Connor, you know, and it's like you don't want to talk about your ex and like why you broke up. And it was a really traumatic experience for Connor. And if I could have spared him from that, I would have. I really didn't know that he was going to come back alone like that. I really didn't. And I didn't know that I would make that decision. Otherwise, I wouldn't have sent Gus. It just, days feel like weeks in there. And they were gone for what felt like a month. Like, wow. It was crazy.
Yeah. It was definitely something you could see in your face and like your pain, and, you know, especially watching him walk down with Gus. And so that was, you know, something that you could tell you were like, oh shit, you know, that's not what I was. And, you know, mentioning America, and, you know, it's not just the house that has a say in your relationship. There's, you know, the nature of Love Island. There's millions of people voicing their opinions about you and your relationship. It's not just your relationship. It's not just you. And you mentioned you're more introverted, I guess. You like to be alone and have like the different separations. How do you do that in this situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was why Connor and I got so close, is I felt like I could be with him, and it was like he would let me be alone with myself. Like I could be with him, but I was able to have that same calming sense of being alone that I'm used to at home. And I think that was kind of how I got through it. But yeah, I think the America thing is confusing, especially for me, because I'd watched the show before, and I'm a big fan of the UK version. And I always felt like they supported couples based on my experience watching the show, like happy couples. And from my perspective, I thought that Connor and I were very happy. So when America was voting like that, I was confused, and I was wondering, what am I missing? What am I not seeing? And I unfortunately feel like that's where it's hard when you don't have your support system, because I think that all of us girls saw relationships really differently. And I don't think there was anyone who really saw relationships like I did. I actually feel like Carrington saw the most eye to eye with me. And as the show progressed, we actually had a lot of private chats. They didn't show them, I don't think, as much, but Carrington really did kind of understand me. And that helped me a lot as I was struggling in the end, because I was able to talk to him, and he sort of helped me, especially without Connor being there for me in my last like week in the villa. Carrington was really good about, I voiced to him about, you know, being introverted and needing that time alone, and how I could get through this experience, you know, without Connor. And he was a huge help to me. So I think just voicing how you are and what you need is so important in friendships and in relationships.
Was there ever a time, just going a little bit off topic, where you just took a step back and thought, wow, millions of people across the US are watching me right now?
Honestly, no, not really. I really like didn't think about it. I think when you're there from day one, like it doesn't hit you the same way, because I think that we kind of got eased into it because there was actually like days where we didn't film or stuff like that, and so it kind of just became like home. And it sort of, it was funny, like my last week in the villa, I was like getting ready and stuff, and I was just thinking, wow, this is so crazy, like I can't imagine like leaving this place now. And I wasn't even thinking about the cameras anymore at that point. I think I just thought, oh, I hope they're getting this. Like I hope they're capturing this moment. I had like an office moment where I was thinking about like how Jim and Pam like went back and watched their love story, and Connor and I would talk about that. We're like, oh my God, like we can show our kids this one day. Like we can go back and like watch our love story unfold. And so, I mean, yes and no. I didn't really think about it too much,
Right.
but
But how about leaving and then coming home to a platform and to people knowing you and talking about you? Was that overwhelming at all?
so I actually eased myself back in. I kind of had a plan in place. So I had one of the bigger social media followings going into the show out of the other contestants. And I've dated high profile people. So I am kind of used to the spotlight in a sense. I've never been in it myself, but I know what it's like. And I know how they kind of handled it, and I sort of took notes from that. So my mom and my sister were running my social, and my family friend were running my social media. So I really, that first week back outside, I only responded to texts and I only called family and friends. And then slowly after like a week or two, I started to like go on Instagram more. But for the most part, I really eased myself back in. And I'm actually glad that I went through it first, because when Connor came out, I was able to kind of help guide him through it, because it was really, really overwhelming for him. And I'm really glad that I was able to be there for him to help him, because it's a really tough thing, especially Reddit.
Mm-hmm.
But also there's some Reddit threads that have shown me a lot of love. So thank you for those Reddit threads. But I stay off Twitter. I don't go on Twitter. So
Yeah, I was thinking Twitter because I know when episodes are on, Twitter is where everyone is talking about it, especially Love Island. So I can't even imagine just putting your name in the search and going through it.
I saw for a lot of it, and what was hard for me actually was this is like built into my anxiety while I was on the show, is my skin had been the worst it had ever been in my entire life, and I like couldn't get it under control. I have struggled with my acne my whole life, but it was the worst it had ever been, and I'm like, this is my moment, and I am struggling with these breakouts. And I just knew that when I got out of the villa, I was so nervous about people saying mean things. And it's like, I can't help it, you know, like I'm doing the best I can. I am clean. It's a lot of it's out of my control. And I think that was the thing that was the most hurtful, to see people poking fun at that, because that's just mean.
Yeah.
It's just really mean. It's like Mackenzie Dipman, no makeup. It's like, come on, guys.
It's a little bit disgusting, in my opinion, how much we, people just talk about looks and all of that. And, especially things you cannot control. Like you said, like if you have a breakout or something, that's not something that anybody has control over. It's just hormones and other stress and so many variables associated with that. Now, coming from a background where you were self-conscious, you were bullied, being on TV and then coming out and seeing all of the mean things that people were saying, how did that impact your mental health?
It definitely is hard. I think what's actually harder for me is seeing the comments about Connor. I am a fiercely protective person of people that I love, especially my inner circle. And that was really hard for me to see that. I've really this is where it ties into the interesting thing about I don't really care what people think. Sometimes the thing that bothers me is when people question, am I a good person? Because I never want anyone to feel, excluded or hurt or any of the negative feelings that I've had in the past. I never want anyone to feel that way because of my representation on social media or the things that I do, or the things that I say. So if anyone ever takes issue with that kind of thing, that is when I am upset and I want to do something to explain myself. And that really hasn't happened, but that is when I would feel upset. And I think that's like with COVID, it is being in the public eye. You do have to take that into consideration, how people are going to react to you doing things during this pandemic. And I think that's something that I'm very sensitive of. I don't want to upset anyone. But as far as like, I've gotten past the acne comments. I'm like, I'm okay. But yeah, my mom is a huge help too. She comes from a psychology background. So does my grandpa. My grandpa had a PhD in psychology, and my mom studied psychology in school. So she's a tremendous help, and she really helps keep me grounded and positive. So
I am so excited to announce that this podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. And as anxious like you listeners, you get 10% off your first month by visiting BetterHelp. That's betterhelp.com/like you. As a therapist who promotes how important therapy is, it would only make sense for me to see my own therapist, which is something I do every single week. When I first started off with a therapist, it was to address both my health and my social anxiety. Although once I was able to work through that, I realized how much more I still had to do. Even on my good weeks, I make sure to go to therapy because I know how important it is for my mental health, and it is part of my self-care routine. It also helps me prepare for when things get stressful or overwhelming. I love knowing that I'm able to speak in a safe, non-judgmental environment with someone who just gets me, sometimes more than I get myself. But I won't lie, it did take some time for me to find the right fit and someone I connected with. With BetterHelp, they make this step incredibly easy. Once you sign up, you fill up a questionnaire about yourself and they match you to a specialist that they think is the right fit for you. It takes away the challenging step of going through that process alone. Once they match you, they give you the option to give it a try and to get comfortable with that individual, or to speak with someone new who you think would be a better help for you. BetterHelp makes going to therapy easy with its fully online service. The best part is you can chat with a therapist through video, phone, or text, and you can schedule your sessions at any time that is convenient for you. As someone with social anxiety, I love the option for chat and phone as an easy way to start out therapy and to learn to get comfortable, because as someone who's been there, I know it's not always easy. So if you're still on the fence about starting therapy, take advantage of this 10% off and check them out at betterhelp.com. That's betterhelp.com/like you. Awesome. I was listening actually to an interview where you were talking a lot about self-growth and how thinking back to before the show till now, you found that that's happened a lot. And same thing with like loving yourself before you're able to love someone else. Can you talk about how you found that you've grown as a person, maybe because of the show or as a response to the show?
Yeah, I think that like going back to what I was saying about like struggling to fit in and not understanding where that disconnect was, I do feel like I gained a lot more clarity as to how my actions can be misinterpreted amongst friends. And that gave me a much greater understanding of how to be a better friend. And I think that that's something that as I grow older, I really feel like friendships are more important than ever, especially during these times. So that was a really big takeaway from me is learning how to be a better friend and communicate that just because I leave the room has nothing to do with you, and maybe choosing to not leave the room and being uncomfortable with being uncomfortable in that moment, even though you so badly just want to go sit alone and reflect, sticking in that moment and staying present with those people, because it means a lot to them to have you there. And I also think that I grew a lot with my patience. I think that Connor has taught me so much and brought out so many good qualities in myself. And I think that being away from my family, who is such a tremendous support system for me, has really taught me how to be that voice of reason in my head for myself, and not relying on my mom or my sister to be that. Yeah, I feel like I'm in a really, really great place in myself, because when you're in this environment where you're trying to make friends and you're trying to find a partner and there is competition involved, you really have to like sit with yourself and be like, what do I bring to the table? What am I? Who am I? Like, what do I love about myself? Like, what do I want to work on about myself? And it really, I think if you can embrace the experience and embrace the uncomfortable, it really can change you for the better. And I think that's been the case with me, at least.
That's such an important message. And do you think that had anything to do with you being able to go on a show like Love Island? Because I can just imagine like someone with anxiety who's been bullied, went to homeschool from like regular school, is now in the public. How do you shift to that?
I think that it really just is about that journey of self-love, because once you reach that point with yourself where you're like, I'm capable of so many things, and if I put my mind to it, then I can make things happen. And I think I didn't expect it, but I am so excited about having a connection with so many young women who really genuinely care about what I have to say, and want my advice, and want to be heard, and want to feel loved. And I think that's a really cool opportunity for me. And I feel really honored to have that opportunity to be able to advocate for women who, are maybe awkward, and maybe struggle in their relationships, and are emotional, are anxious, are all these different things. And, really trying to be a part of that movement towards like empowering women. And I just feel like so honored to like be a part of that. And I feel like that's a big takeaway that like fans of mine from the show will say, is that I am that woman. And I feel so honored to have that role, and I take it very seriously, and makes me feel very hopeful for the future about where I can go from here.
Absolutely. Yeah. When did you start finding things to help manage your anxiety?
I think that it really came in high school. So I really struggled a lot, the most my senior year. So that was when I went through a breakup over the summer, and my boyfriend at the time was like quarterback in my high school, started dating this other girl that was in my grade, because he was younger than us. And she just made my life miserable. I was ostracized. Girls would follow me and make throw up noises behind me. I had death threats on Twitter against me. I literally felt like there was nowhere I could go. I spent so much time in the principal's office just trying to hide. And that's when I went to be homeschooled. But that's when I really had to learn how to cope with my anxiety. And I definitely did the wrong things at times. I think it's a trial and error process. I think that, people recommend meditation, but I think if you have an anxious mind and you have a very active mind, then that can be really difficult at first. So you kind of got to figure out your own meditation. And that was when I started to, figure out the strategies to cope with it. Like, what could I do? What made me feel better in those moments where I did have panic attacks, and I'm not afraid to say it. Like, I would be getting dressed for school and I was just like, I can't go. Like, I can't do it. Like, I really can't. And I would just sit on my bedroom floor and I'm like, I can't move. And I think that for me, establishing rituals and routines that I found comfort in, I think that people with anxiety, I think that we really feel out of control sometimes, and regaining that sense of control by creating habits and rituals is so important, at least for me. So yeah, that was a lot of it, was eating certain foods every morning, doing the same things every morning. Like I said, the watching the Netflix. I know that sounds like not educational, but I did watch a lot of documentaries too. So
That
yeah,
counts.
I think creating those habits was a huge help for me, at least. So
Do you look
Yeah.
back and think like, holy shit, I've come so far?
yeah, I really do. And I think honestly, I'm grateful now for my bullies, for my kind of like demons that made it so hard to feel like not to feel like not anxious. Like I've grown so much, and I'm so proud of the woman that I am, because I feel like any situation that's thrown at me, I can handle it now. And it doesn't mean that I'm perfect. I still get anxious all the time. I got anxious getting ready for this. I give myself like 3 hours to get ready, because I always need to make sure I have enough time. And I still get anxious, but I feel so like whole. Like I feel like empowered, and yeah, I say I'm grateful for it now, because it made me who I am. I think I'd be very, very different if I hadn't had that kind of adversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why we decided to name the show Anxious Like You, because our mission, one of our missions, is to talk about this, because a lot of people feel like they're struggling alone. So I love that you said, like, I was anxious to get ready for this, because we as the hosts talk about this constantly before our guests come on. Like, oh my gosh, I'm so anxious. Are you anxious? We don't want to miss a question. What if we forget a really important part? And we sweaty palms right now. So
Yeah, same.
um, so I think it's such an important message, especially given who your fans are. They're young women who are possibly going through very similar experiences that you experienced growing up, maybe being bullied or feeling like they can't fit in, or having people, just vandalize their homes, or, bully them to the point where which is, it's crazy to me that people do this to each other. It's so cruel, but your message is so important because
Yeah.
of that.
And I think
Did you?
it's important to remember too that just because, like you said, it's hard to imagine people doing that, but I always like to think I'm sad for them. I'm like, you must be going through something so terrible, or you feel such a certain way that you would lash out like this. And I wish that I could do something to help them. I genuinely mean that. I think most people really just need love, and really just need what we all need. And I don't think that we're that different. I just think that all of us cope with it differently, and we go through different things. But yeah, I
Mhm.
just want to throw that in. I just, because
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
people behind, like the keyboard warriors, like, I'm thinking, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you feel like you have to put this hate out there to feel better. Like, I'm truly sorry, because it takes a lot more to be that way than it does to be kind. It does. So
100%.
Yeah. And that's even at the beginning when I asked you about, being emotional and other people being critical. I think the exact same thing. People that were being critical of you showing your emotions and being so true to yourself have their own insecurities of not being able to be that way. And they project it onto you, and they project it onto, whoever they see on reality TV or any social media influencers, because it's just easier to put the blame on someone else than to check
yeah,
yourself.
exactly.
So how do you respond to hateful comments, or do you ignore?
So I really try to ever avoid deleting. I know some people delete comments. I think that freedom of speech is very true. I think that it turns to a point where occasionally it's too much. And if I see, my mom also monitors to see if they're doing it like on other people's, like other Love Islanders posts, and kind of keeps an eye on that, because it's kind of interesting, the overlap sometimes. And I do call some people out, and because I want to understand why they're feeling that way. And a lot of times, if you do call that person out, they'll end up apologizing. They normally will see the error of their ways if you do voice. And then a lot of times people chime in, and then that creates a sense of connection between all the people that were following me and commenting. And so sometimes I do, sometimes I ignore. I'd say most of the time I ignore, but I'm not afraid to speak up. Very rarely delete, because I think that just makes it worse. That's my tip to social media influencers. Do not delete unless it's absolutely the most heinous comment you've ever seen in your entire life. Just leave it, okay?
I mean, we can learn from that. Me and Michelle, we get triggered very easily.
Right.
People are mean. People sometimes are too mean.
People can be really mean.
Yes.
Yeah. So you mentioned you and Connor obviously are together, and after the show, did you find that you had relationship anxiety given what had occurred on the show? Do you guys, how do you cope with that after being on this huge platform together?
Yeah, so that was definitely a process. I think that the villa will always be with us in a sense, but that wasn't the real world, and none of that stuff would have happened in the real world. Typically, actually, when I'm dating somebody, I'm typically seeing them for a couple months before anything ever gets that serious, and I'm typically dating around. And so that was very different to be put in that kind of scenario. And Connor's kind of the same way. He doesn't typically jump into something that serious that fast, but it was just kind of different for us. But yeah, it is definitely kind of something that perplexes your mind a bit, because these experiences happened to you. They were very, very real. They hurt you in a way that's profound. And unfortunately, you don't have the freedom to communicate like you would in the outside world. So Connor and I had to kind of go through certain situations that happened and ask the other one, what really happened here? Like, what from your perspective happened? And that was a big part in moving forward. And there was a lot of things we learned about how the other one was feeling that we didn't know. We didn't watch the show back. The only part that I watched was Casa Amor and our first episode. The Casa Amor, I wanted to see what Connor was expressing, because I was so shocked when people were saying that he was so committed and that kind of thing because of where we were at when he left. And so I wanted to see it for myself, and it broke my heart to watch that. That was really hard. But yeah, we really had to go back and relive those things. And I would say for the first month after the villa, it was difficult because I did have feelings of being angry and hurt, and he did too, about things that had happened. But we really had to almost start our relationship over again and really give us a chance to see what it was like dating outside the villa. And I think that you really have to do that. You have to treat it like it's almost a brand new relationship once you get out. And I think that but also keeping up that same level of communication throughout everything. And then obviously adding in the distance, like he works in public accounting, but he was delayed his start date. The start date was delayed because of COVID. So he didn't start until December. So we had a couple months to just live together basically. And we split time in each place. So, because we kind of relied on that. Like, we lived together since the day that we met. And that's really interesting because I've never lived with somebody before that I was dating. Or the guy that I was dating before Connor, I saw him maybe once every 1 to 2 weeks.
Wow.
For about an hour or two. That was my last relationship. That was my serious boyfriend before Connor. So yeah, it was a big change. For sure. Yeah, massive change.
So the long distance relationship, do you guys have any rituals or things that make it easier to cope with that?
Yeah, so we did, speaking about communication, we did kind of talk about, that was another weird thing, was adding texting into your relationship. Because texting is a huge part of how you develop your expectations for your partner. Like, that's just kind of how it works. Well, you want to know, are they a FaceTimer? Are they a phone caller? Are they strictly a texter? I've been with guys who are strictly texters, and it's so hard. Like, it's so hard. So we actually did have a conversation, and we're like, what are your absolutes? Like, what do you need out of texting and out of like phone communication? And we kind of agreed on the same thing. It's morning and night. Like, text me when you wake up and text me before you go to sleep. That is my like bare minimums. And also just kind of if you can communicate, sure, but it's those are our things. So we know that. And so the other one knows if you don't do that, then you're going to be confused. So that was a big part of it. And that's a big thing. And the long distance, like I said, because we were able to kind of live together until he started his job, we didn't really have to be long distance until the last couple of weeks, the last few weeks. We spent 3 weeks apart in December, and then now we're going on 3 weeks in January, and we actually don't have a trip planned to see each other. Just with COVID, it's complicated. It's hard. I live with my parents, and he's working, and it's hard. It's difficult. But I would say that over communicating is key when you're long distance. Like, don't let things pile up and build up, because if you seem like everything is fine and then all of a sudden you just like drop this whammy bombshell of like, I took this relationships class in college, like kitchen sinking, and you're just like throwing everything in there. So I really try to avoid that. So I try to always communicate that. And he does the same with me. And so I think that that's finding the right time to speak up, but not holding back from speaking up at all is a big part of long distance. And figuring out, do you need to FaceTime? How much do you need to FaceTime? For me, actually, I like to FaceTime, but it sometimes makes it harder being apart.
Yeah.
It in my experience, it's like when you see their face, it seems like they're there. And I just feel kind of almost like empty after the FaceTime calls. I just feel so sad. And like, oh my God, and he's not here. Like he just was for like 2 hours on that FaceTime call, and now he's not.
Yeah.
So
That's
it's
so
kind
hard.
of figuring out what works for you. But I feel so grateful that I'm in a relationship with someone that I trust. Because every boyfriend I've ever had, it's either been a non-exclusive relationship or they cheated on me. And this is the first time in my life that I can honestly say I'm not worried about being cheated on. Like, and it makes long distance a lot easier.
Oh,
A
absolutely.
lot easier.
Such a good feeling to trust your partner.
I know. That's hard to come by. It really is.
Yeah. You think it should be like you said, like the bare minimum, like trust, that's so important. But yeah, it is hard to come by. I'm so happy for you that you guys are,
Thank you.
together and making this work, because
Thank
you
you.
you could tell there was a real connection there.
Thank you. Yeah. I
So
feel very grateful.
Is there ever going to be the Jim and Pam moment where you rewatch everything from beginning to end, or is that off limits still?
I feel like from what I've heard, like that wasn't our love story as we know it. There were so many moments, like there were times like Connor would do the sweetest little things for me all the time. He would make me breakfast like every morning. I would bring him coffee every morning. I would surprise him with these little things. He would do the same for me. And from what I gathered from my family, that wasn't shown. And so I think that we just kind of want to leave it for ourselves and just, we know what happened. Maybe one day, a long time from now, but maybe when we have to watch it with like our kids or something, like having to go over it, being like, oh gosh, know.
I think that's a great example of a healthy boundary that a couple comes up with. Absolutely. Because we're all so different, and what works for one couple doesn't work for the next. You guys have an extra variable in there, which you guys were part of a huge reality show. And so I think that if it's going to contribute to your mental wellness within the relationship and just individually, it's really important. Maybe people won't understand it, but for you, it's like, no, I know this is going to keep me mentally sane. I don't need to create new stories in my head about what they decided to show and what they didn't decide to show.
Yeah, exactly. But it was helpful. I lied. I watched Casa. I watched the first episode, and then I watched the episodes after I left, because I was very confused about Moira and Connor's situation, because I was hearing very different stories. So to watch it, it really put my mind at ease, because I learned the truth finally. But yeah, I think it's kind of like, I don't like to talk about old relationships very much. Like I don't personally, I I hate when people are like, how many sexual partners have you had?
Mhm.
What, all those kind of things. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't even know the names of Connor's ex-girlfriends. I don't think I've ever heard them, maybe once. Like, you don't need to relive the past sometimes. Sometimes it's better to just live in the present.
Mm-hmm. I think that's such an important relationship. Number two, you see, you're just dropping really good relationship tips because people get so caught up with the past and they get caught up with numbers and like, how was your relationship? How did you treat that person? And I think then we start creating a story and like, okay, let me compare myself to that person. And it's so unhealthy. So yeah, living in the present moment, enjoying your relationship for what it is and having, your new relationship. And the fact that you decided to start over afterwards and not heavily focus it on what happened in the show seems to be working for you guys. So that's great.
Yeah, and I think especially for anxious people, like I think that anxious people very much live in the past and live in the future, but really don't live in the present. And I think
Exactly.
that is like something that I've been so mindful of with COVID and quarantine that really helped me tremendously with going into the show with like coping with my anxiety is living in the present moment.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, I mean, that relates to relationships and every part of your life. It's very important to have goals, but also live
Right.
in the here and now.
Absolutely. I know you mentioned slightly some self-care tips in terms of like rewatching things and, eating the same thing for breakfast every morning. What other self-care tips do you participate in that you think help your anxiety not be so high?
I love to make lists. I'm a big list maker. I love to like check in with myself and make goals. I like to make like short-term goals, long-term goals. I think lists are a big help. For me, like family time, putting down my phone for that time as well. Like when I hang out with my family, I put my phone away. Um, yeah, I think getting outside also, that is so important. I truly believe that if we kind of like take our shoes off and get to like touch the earth like with our feet, as like as silly as that may sound, like I think that I wasn't doing that enough prior to COVID. And I think that, prior to COVID, I was working in the nightlife industry because I was trying to save up money. So that way, once I graduated from school, I could take any job I wanted and I wouldn't need to do something for money, like work in a job I hated just to make a paycheck. So I was saving up money, but I was working these terrible hours. I lived alone in my apartment. I barely went outside. I had a crazy weird schedule because of the hours that I was working and how much classwork I had. So when I moved home during COVID, I finally was getting outdoors and it did wonders for my anxiety and my self-care. Also like baths. I love baths. Like having a moment with candles. I love that. It feels so good. I love that so much, but yeah.
So
Face
good.
mask.
Love it. Yeah. All of the above.
Yes.
Exactly. Love the earth thing. I think a lot of people, we don't give a lot of credit to nature, but nature, putting your feet on the grass and it's just so
Grounding
nice.
yourself. Yeah.
Grounding. Exactly. Because that's what we do for anxiety. We teach grounding tools and it's like a really good way to connect yourself with your environment.
Yeah, I did a thing called forest bathing and they actually talk about like grounding with the earth, and it was really intriguing to me because it made me look at nature a little bit differently. And I think that when you kind of realize how small you are in the grand scheme of this like crazy earth that we live in, it can, at least for me, that sometimes can help, because sometimes I feel like it's all just like caving in on me, and then I walk outside and I'm like, wow, the earth is so big and it's so beautiful and it's so incredible the way that it just operates. I also looked into Ayurveda, and I don't know if you are familiar with it at all, but it talks a lot about the times of day and thinking about how you're most productive. And you learn about your doshas. It's one of the oldest practices. It's a sister to yoga. And that was also really interesting as well, was learning more about the times of day and what that means for your body and for your mind. So yeah, that's something, if people have never looked into it, I highly recommend it. Yeah.
Sounds interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always good to have like things that I've never heard of or other people haven't heard of, because we're all so different and so many different things can work differently for all of us. So
what do you guys do for your anxiety?
Oh man. So Nadia and I had a whole episode about this because at least personally, I'm very anxious. And so I do a lot of, I have a dog, which I know you have a dog as well.
Yes.
So my dog is like one of my grounding, things, he comes up to me or my husband puts him on my lap and I just like cuddle him. We got a
Aw.
hammock outside, which has been really nice to just lay outside and swing,
Mm.
binge watch over and over, like you said,
Yeah.
the shows like Friends, The Office, all of those things. So
Yes.
very similar things. Yeah.
Same, yeah. And run. When I
Running.
need to like get outside and not focus on things, just run and don't think. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I wish that mine was actually swimming was a big one for me. That's something that's like really great too. Yeah, my dog is definitely a big help. It's a little different because I'm living at home and there's 4 other dogs. So Pippa's kind of become one with the pack. It does hurt my feelings sometimes because she doesn't always want to hang out with me like she used to. But I've learned to give love to all of the dogs because I grew up with them. They were my family dogs. So bringing my own baby into that mix was fun. But yeah, dogs for sure. When I say family, I mean dogs too.
Yes,
They're included.
They're always included. Those little things. People need to know like pets are everything.
Everything. Yes.
Yeah.
Becoming an owner of your own animal is wild. It's a crazy experience.
Yeah, you have a child.
Yeah, you grow up, you have to.
Yeah.
That is like, I think that was a huge turn in my growth as well, was because I got Pippa when I had just turned 21 and I didn't really like go out and drink much until I turned 21. I had this short little phase, but then I got Pippa and I had to be home with her every night because I lived alone. And I think it like made me to love something with your entire heart, like so wholly and completely. It changes you for the better. It really does.
100%. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yes. I love dogs. People don't understand. It's like having a kid.
Literally like having a kid. It's such an intense bond. It's amazing. That like it made me more excited about the prospect of having kids one day because I used to be like, oh, I don't need to have a kid. Yeah. Like I would be fine if I didn't, fine if I did. But then having Pippa, I'm like, oh, I don't know.
Maybe I like taking care of something. Okay. Final question. If you can give advice to young girls or not necessarily just young, somebody that maybe was in your position or has a similar story to you and is now entering an environment that might cause them anxiety or that might cause them stress, what would you tell them?
I would first say to breathe. Deep breaths are huge. And then really just for a moment, like check in with yourself and really try to assess like, how am I feeling? What can I do to get through this moment and show myself that I can overcome this anxiety and I can do this? And how can I adjust to the situation? And if it's like, whether it's an event or it's like a big move or something, I just think that you have to be so engaged with yourself and what you need and doing the best you can in the environment that you are in and making those adjustments when necessary. I don't know if that's specific enough. But.
That's perfect.
Okay.
That's perfect. Solid answer. That's a solid answer.
Yeah.
Where can people find you?
So I am on Instagram. It's just my first last name, Mackenzie Dipman. And then I am trying to get more of my YouTube going. It is a lot of work. And that's Mackenzie and Connor. We share the channel. And then I'm hoping eventually you'll find me on a podcast. But we will see. Stay tuned for that in the future. There's definitely a lot of projects coming from me this year, but Instagram is the hub. So just check in with me there.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, this was so nice chatting with you. I loved learning more about you and your story, and all the tips you have to share with us. I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate to you and find some value in this. So thank you so much.
Thank you guys. This was amazing. I feel like I just had like the best therapy session I've had in a long time. I feel great.
Awesome. That's always good to hear. All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Anxious Like You. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a screenshot and send it to us so we can repost it on our social media, Anxious Like You. Also, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. Join the Anxious Like You community by following @AnxiousLikeYou on Instagram. See you in the next episode.